What is up, my friends? Welcome to my weekly office hours. My name is JDM, aka Josh David Miller. I help startup founders find traction. I do run cohorts and coaching programs for first-time founders who are pre-seed, and I also run design sprints for the companies that are between the seed and Series A stage to help them find traction there. And every single week, I hop on right here on wherever you're listening to this, principally on YouTube. To answer whatever questions you have. And this week, we've got kind of a theme because I got a few questions back on customers and customer personas, customer development, and how to do that. So we're going to talk about good personas and bad personas and what kind of makes that out. I also have an announcement to share there as well. So gonna be some good stuff. We're gonna keep a fairly brisk pace here. Thanks so much for joining me. We're gonna dive right on in. If you are watching this live, I'm really curious, what's the big thing on your mind this week? What's keeping you up at night? What's the risk that you're facing as a founder? Like what's really just weighing on you at the moment? Be a little vulnerable. Throw that down in the chat. Super curious. Maybe we'll talk about it next week. Okay, with that having been said, so I got a lot of questions about the video that I released last week on YouTube about customer personas. And so I did this big deep dive walkthrough of customer personas and how you approach that and how robust they need to be and how to niche down and why we got to do those and how that connects to design thinking and so much more. And the questions I got were really good about some things that I probably should have included in the video. So I wanted to take a moment to kind of answer those questions here. I will put a link in the description to the actual video. So if you want to do that deep dive of customer personas, I do recommend that you check that out. There's also a link, I'll put it in the notes as well, for a free template that you can use. It's in FigJam, it's like a digital whiteboard, and it's actually, I'm going to screen share and show you, what that looks like here. But if you want to nab that, you can nab that completely for free. It's the one I use in the real world with real startups every day. So without further ado, let's go into the first one. So the first thing that I should have talked about that I didn't was, what is an example of a bad persona? And this is kind of a weird question. I'm always like, how do I do this well? And like asking how I do it bad is just a question that really resonates with me well. I love that. There's a great brainstorming technique that you can use for ideation when you're like, okay, we have this problem that we want to address and we don't know how to address it. One of the best ways that you can go about addressing that is the evil mastermind way. So you take the thing that you're talking about and you're saying, if I were an evil genius, how would I make this way worse than it already is? How do I maximize the terribleness of the situation? And so you come up with all these ways if the evil genius would make the situation worse. And then once you have, and so release our creativity, and it's fun, and it activates different parts of our brain, and it's storytelling and so forth. And then once you get this list of all these evil things you can do to make it worse, you then flip that on its head and say, okay, how do we make sure we're the exact polar opposite of each of those things? So it's a good brainstorming technique. And so asking like, oh, how do I do this badly is a really fun way to approach how you do it well. So I want to talk about some ways to do it really badly. So first, before we dive like too much into that, I'm going to go ahead and throw up on screen here my template. So this is what this looks like here. This is inside FigJam. Let me do that a little better. Okay. So there's some instructions over here, and but we're gonna ignore that. I'm just gonna kind of zoom in to this area here. So we have a bio, with some kind of detailed information about this person. We've given them a name because these are semi-fictional representations of real people. So we give them a name. We have just the basic demographics about them, who they are, how much money they're making, and so forth. But then we also have a fairly robust bio, as you see here. We're not putting in just a couple pieces of information. We have a fairly robust bio. We have information on their personality, and these are sliders. You pick these up and you slide them back and forth. And so are they an extroverted person, an introverted person? Are they more analytical, creative, etc.? So got a whole bunch of interesting factoids, about our person and what they look like. And then the bottom part of this are diving way, way deeper. What are their interests and influences? What motivates them? And what goals do they draw from those motivations? What are their jobs to be done? What are their wants, their needs, their fears, their problems and pains and frustrations that come from those wants and needs and fears? And what's their priority stack like? So this is a lot of detail. And that leads to the first big mistake that you can make in personas. The first way to make a bad persona is to have it really light. So a really light persona does not help you out. So if you have this bio that's, a couple of sentences long, or you have like, well, they could be rich or they could be poor, you're just not giving a lot of detail. Or if all the sliders are in the middle because you don't want to pick one on them, or you don't understand what their influences are, and so forth. When you go through that particular exercise and you come out with that lightweight, kind of vacuous sort of level of detail, that's not good. That's actually pretty terrible. And so the first way to avoid making a bad persona is to not do that, is to not have it be really shallow. Even if you don't have the requisite information, there are ways to get it. So there's that. The another way to make a bad persona, and this is really, really common, is somebody will come back, they'll have a really robust, really detailed persona. But the mistake that they make is that the persona is entirely written from the perspective of your product, your service, your startup, your whatever. So from your world, this is their problems. And so you list the problems that they have that are specific to what your product can solve. You list their influences that are specifically related to the startup space that you're operating in. And the reason that that's bad is that context is critical. Context is so important to understanding customers and motivations. As an example, if you say, okay, like this is a big problem that they have and it really sucks for them, and that's great, and so you document that on here. But when you start listing but if you ignore listing their other wants, their other needs, their other fears, their other priorities in their life, you may miss that the problem that you're solving is, while they would like it solved, it's problem number 8 on their list, not problem number 1. And nobody pays to solve problem number 8. And so your persona is less valuable simply because you didn't understand the context in which you were operating. So another way to make a bad persona is to not have this be about the customer in their totality, but instead have it be about the customer strictly as it relates to your business. If you're really early on in the process at like the ideation stage, it's even worse, because if you do that, you're actually still trying to form what the product is, what the solution is, and that by doing that, and you're taking information that might be really valuable in the development of that offering, and you're just ignoring it. You're just taking it off the table because you think you already know the answer. And so all you ever write down is what you think the answer is. And so you don't learn what the answer actually is from your customers. So those are the two biggest ways, I think, to make a bad persona. One way to make, just to recap, one way to make a bad persona is to be too light. Another way to make a bad persona is to not put it in the full context of their life, to restrict it just to the things that you think are relevant to your product and service. Another way to do a bad persona is to not niche down enough. So you have this detail about a customer, and there's a lot there, but they're still, at the end of the day, a fairly generic person. So you wrote all this stuff out, but nothing that really narrows down who they are. And there are lots of different ways to niche down. You can niche down based on income. You can niche down based on values. You can niche down based on demographics and psychographics. You can niche down based on geography, like where they live. There's probably 10 more ways that you can niche down. And if those details of niching down don't come really through when you're doing your persona, then you are actually just missing a lot of critical detail. And you're ending up with a generic persona that at the end of the day isn't super helpful. So you want to get really, really, really specific. And I talked last week about a way that can be helpful. So you can check out last week's office hours, number 44, I think, to hear an example from a recent competition where personas can kind of unlock a lot of discovery doors. So those are some bad personas, bad ways to do personas. Before we move on to what makes a good persona, an example of a good persona, if you're interested in this whole process of customers and the importance of customers, then do check out the latest episode of Zero to Traction. It's a podcast that I co-host with my friend Cameron Law. And the episode that we released just yesterday, actually April 12th, was with the founders of a company called EcoMap. They're out of Baltimore. And the whole subject of the conversation is an hour about customers and their journey of, customers and personas and how they found the wrong customer at first, and it was not specific enough, and they were super vulnerable and just really, really awesome. And there's a lot of lessons you can take away from that. So if you want to dive deeper into why customers are important from the context of a real startup that's doing really well right now, check out the Zero to Traction podcast. But end shameless plug, let's move on to examples of a good persona. So I'm going to dive back into the screen share for this part. So, and I'm going to go ahead and remove the banner so that we can see a little bit easier. So examples of a good persona are going to be ones that are kind of those, again, if we go back to that ideation thing, they're going to be the polar opposites of the very things that we're talking about here. So when we go to, persona Patty here, so we give them a name. So a good persona is going to have a name that you can reference. And that's actually super helpful, like surprisingly, weirdly super helpful to have a persona that you can reference as if they were a real person. So I call this persona Patty, but this is where it's like, let's say you're serving a small business owner, right? You could refer to them as, business owner Bob or something like that. So they have a name, but then they also have like that archetype built into it. You don't have to do that, but that's why I call it persona Patty here. But the first thing to do to have a good persona is to actually have a name. And a name that you can reference. That we were talking about, well, Patty would like, well, actually, I don't think that would resonate with Patty because these are semi-fictional representations, you can actually use that to your advantage as part of that creative brainstorming process. So more powerful. So a good persona actually has a name. It's just not like our customer or a business owner. It's freaking Patty. And the other way that becomes good is when that translates into the further detail. So she's Patty. So we're going to say that she's a woman. We're going to give her an age. She's 34 years old. Her occupation is as a social media manager for a few different companies. She's a freelancer. She's making decent money. Like she charges a good rate per hour for where she is in her career. But she's not working 40 hours a week, and so she doesn't have as much income as she'd like there. She's located. We're just going to say she's located right here in Sacramento, which is actually part of the barrier because most of her clients aren't here in Sacramento, so she's got to hunt outside the geographic region for that. She went to school, but she actually was an English major, and she just ended up in social media. But she had that passion for writing, and that's how she she entered the world. And she's single, but she is dating, and she's got a dog, and the dog's named Rover, and Rover's a golden retriever, and she takes Rover through walks in the park every day. You see how much detail that we're getting out of for Patty. Like, what does Patty, the social media manager, look like? And so that's the good form of all that level of detail. And when you go to the bio, that's when we flesh out a lot of those things. So she went to college. What was that like? What was her experience there? Why, how did she go from English major to social media manager and so forth? So it's again going to have a good amount of detail. And then because like a good persona is going to resonate all the way through, because we already know those things that I said about Patty, we can actually start to sort of deduce like what personality traits we think Patty has. So we can say that like from everything I said here, it actually doesn't sound like she's super extroverted. It sounds like she's a little bit introverted to me. And I could be wrong about that, and your interpretation may be different, but I'm thinking like she's probably a little bit more introverted. We definitely think she was an English major and she's doing social media. She's a little bit more on the creative side, right? So we do on the creative side. We already established she's a little bit busy. She's just working to work and trying to make it and so forth. But she's pretty organized. Like, she's got to keep these social media calendars up for a lot of people. So she's a fairly organized person. Is she independent or a team player? We've already established she's like fairly independent because she's working on her own. That doesn't mean that she's not a team player, but she's fairly independent, right? Is she more passive or active? Well, she's an entrepreneur, so she's going to be a little bit more on the active side. And is she risk averse or risk tolerant? Well, entrepreneurs are generally more risk tolerant. So you can see how just by talking about Patty in a real way, we can get a lot of really good detail here, and it's all very consistent. A good persona is going to be really consistent. And when it gets down to these things, this is where a good persona will actually really shine more. Because what we'll see when we talk about her interests, influence, motivations, and goals is a through line through those things because her interests translate into where she's getting her influences, and her interests and influences translate to motivations and her why. They're central to who she is, and that translates into why she's setting goals this way. And because she's setting goals this way, she has certain jobs that she needs to be done to do that. And that just, this story makes sense. Patty's consistent. She's a real person with depth and personality and character and interest. And because she has those jobs to be done and she's trying to do those, she has wants and needs and fears that we can say that are about her that just make perfect sense. And that translates to problems, pains, and frustration, which are opportunities for us, of course. And then we get an understanding of her priorities from her broader life. And going back to the bad persona where we said we need to understand her priorities, this is a place where, quite honestly, we can have a rounded look at exactly who she is by virtue of being more detailed in her priorities, of putting in priorities that are not specific to our startup. And I said she was a social media manager. So let's say we're doing like a social media scheduling tool. Like that's where we are. So we might list all of her priorities and all of her problems that are specifically related to being a social media manager. Well, it sucks to use Buffer because, and I tried this other tool and it was really expensive and so forth, right? We could do that. And those are important, but it's also important that Patty has career aspirations, that Patty is trying to do more than what she's doing now, that she's not able to book her calendar fully, that she wants to date, that she's actively dating, and marriage is something that's important to her, but she's not there now. And that's a priority that's sitting in her life now. And, spending time outdoors and in nature is important to her as well. And you might be thinking, why the hell are those even anywhere remotely close to relevant for us if we're trying to sell Patty a freaking social media scheduling tool? And the way that those are so important is because they tell us how to talk to Patty. They tell us where to find Patty. They tell us what's going to be interesting to her. They tell us where we're going to sit in the context of her life. Are we going to be something that her means of using us is to get out of the way? I'm going to throw things at this magic tool and it's going to go away and I'm not going to have to think about it. And that's my point, is I'm not going to have to think about it. Or is this something where I actually want to, like, she's trying to dive deep into these specifics and that's where she's spending her time. And so our tool is going to become something that's very central to not only how she does her work, but into the why she does her work and the what of her work, because maybe we've incorporated AI to help her write content and look at the content that resonates and generate content that is going to resonate more based on past performance and all these other things that are helpful to a certain kind of social media manager, but not helpful to others. And understanding and developing that empathy for a person around that broader context of their life is how we create something that's more robust and create something that's more good, right? The very last thing that I want to say makes a good persona is that a good persona is one that's validated. And that's it should be kind of self-explanatory because I made up everything about Patty from a fictional startup just by bullshit. I bullshitted my way through this persona. I made up all kinds of details and they were reasonable. But that's the level of evidence I have for it, is it's reasonable inference at best. Some of that was wild ass guess, like the part about her walking Rover in the park and wanting to marry. So what we have to do is then go out and validate that. And we validate that if you're really early stage by customer conversations. Frankly, you validate these personas through one-on-one customer conversations well through, like, into the seed stage. Like that's, you're still developing all that just well through that process. But eventually you're going to start mixing in more ways of getting data. And so, like, if you throw out an ad on social media and it doesn't resonate, the message doesn't land with Patty, with the Patties that you're targeting in the world, then you can go back and say, why didn't this resonate with Patty? What do I not understand about Patty? Or what did that tell me that I conclude about Patty? And you keep those things updated over time. So, and which is, by the way, your bonus thing that makes a good persona is ones that are up to date and current. This is not an exercise you do once and then like chuck it in a box and throw the box on a shelf. This is something where you keep it out in front of you all the time. It's something you're constantly revising with new data as they come in. As you get validated learning, you're revising it, making Patty a more robust, interesting, compelling, and accurate person to pursue over time. And with that, I'm going to call an end to these questions because I took a bit to address these two, but hopefully you found that helpful or at least mildly interesting. I am going to be right back here in your feeds on April 20th, Thursdays, 10 a.m. I'm right here to answer your questions. If you have a question, hit the link in the description. You can submit a question. If you submit a video question, I'll play it on the air. Otherwise, you can submit a written question, which is what a lot of you have been doing. And with that, I'm going to call it. Thanks so much for spending a few minutes with me today on this Thursday and for sending in your questions. I always look forward to seeing those come through in my inbox. It's a highlight of my day, so keep on sending those my way. And with that, have a fantastic rest of your Thursday. Have a great rest of your week and weekend, and I will see you guys next week. Peace out.